Thank you. First of all, I'm going to start out my next 30 minutes with just some thank yous first, as opposed to wait until the end. Thank you to the vendors that make this great innovation, these products and services that we do business with. TD SYNNEX is in the middle of this great channel ecosystem. So for those vendors that we get the opportunity to buy from you, thank you for that. I really do appreciate your business. For the reselling partners in the room, systems integrators, MSPs, GSIs, FSIs, for all of you in that category that buy those great vendors' products from us, thank you for that business. We really do appreciate it. To my team, I've got a TD SYNNEX team here. I would be remiss not to say thank you to that great team that lifts me up every day and keeps me going. Thank you so much to the consulting partners that are out there in the channel doing the hard work, trying to teach and educate why the channel is important, like Janet Shines with JS Group, and these great companies that really do put their lives into it and believe in the indirect channel. Because frankly, those vendors that I meet, and I meet them every week, that built their team with just direct sales, kept hiring one more direct. And then they come to us and they go, hey, we should get on your line card in your ecosystem. Doesn't work that easy. You gotta commit to the channel. You've heard about a lot of these great sessions today. So I'm just proud today to also thank Dave, Joe, Mark, a lot of the partner team, the whole staff, the event staff, the AV guys. Thank you guys for putting on this great event, inviting me down to share the stage with Tiffany and some of these outstanding speakers that you heard from, Asher and Graham, etc. So this is a special stage here in Miami for me, personally, because I started my technology career 40 plus years ago, just 8 miles away. 8 miles away from here in Coral Gables, Miracle Mile at the IBM branch. IBM was my start. Now, I was in college, so that maybe buys me a couple years, but I was a young man that was from 1,400 miles away. 1,400 miles away brought me all the way down to Coral Gables, and I learned at that time, early on, the power of networking. The power of networking, because all it took for me to leave my small town in the Midwest and come all the way down to Miami was a phone call. There's no internet, of course. It was a phone call from a coach to a coach. And magic happened. Things happened. Set my course of the rest of my journey here. And the power of the network for me to get and be able to put myself through school down there and get a job at IBM while I was going to school was just a relationship. It was a network. It was one phone call and I was in. And that's when I learned, you gotta build a powerful network. And it may not always come out in favor. It might not be fast and quick and easy, but you gotta start and you gotta work on it. So that's why I'm really excited to share today a story. Dave teed it up a little bit, but it's a true story. But before we get in there, let me just explain a little bit about why this story is so relevant and why I asked him if I could do it right before we go network, right? I want this to be fresh on your mind, the story. Now, the theme is multiply, and just the very definition of multiply is to gain greatly in numbers. And how do you do that, and how's that going to really be important? Well, networking is just candidly, it can be very intimidating. For me, I used to dread going into a big room full of people where I didn't know anybody. And where do you start? What's your objective? What are you thinking about? And I think I overthought it a lot. But what I really came to realize was that if it doesn't feel right, I'm probably not doing it right. And so what I'm going to share with you here before I get into the story to drive this point home is I'm going to talk a little bit about a few tips. As we go into networking, I've found at conferences that the networking that we can do, if we take it and we do the right things, the networking can be one of the most valuable pieces of coming to a conference. Now, there's some great slides, great graphics. I hope you all captured a lot of good takeaways today, but I do want to share with you the networking is important. And so don't take that for granted. First tip, when you go into a room, you go into an area, look for the open circles. If it's a closed circle of people, they might be talking about a business deal. They might not really want you to just pop right in on them, all right? But if it's open, it's inviting. Go in and introduce yourself. Make sure that you've got a purpose. Now, you can always connect with a group of people, an individual, on a common interest. We're all here, we have one common interest because we're all here, we all love and partner. So we're all here for that reason, but there's a lot more areas you can connect on. Family, pets, sports, personal lives, where are you from, geography, but connect. Connect on a common interest, a similar interest, and just keep this in mind. Don't go into networking an event thinking, what am I going to sell? Because if you go in with an attitude of selling, it's going to come across. Go in with the attitude of what can I give? What can I help someone else with? Where are they in their, maybe it's a personal help, maybe it's a professional help, but you got to go in with that attitude as opposed to what can I sell today? And by the way, if you do it right, the business will come, the profits will come, and that's why we're all in this for sure. It's all about the relationships that you start and the trust you can build. And as I talk to my team all the time, you can't ask for trust. You got to earn it. And how do you earn trust? Well, you earn trust by doing what you say you're going to do every single time. You earn trust by basically over-delivering on what someone else is expecting you to do. But the best way to earn trust, going back to the first one, is make sure you're given. Give something to people, and over time, that network that you build, they're going to remember when you need a little help or you need an intro to get to someone. You need help trying to navigate and get a business deal done. And credibility, you will build that credibility for sure. Now, there's an old adage, you've heard it before, but I'm going to repeat it one more time. People really don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Say it again. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So you got to care about them, and then the business will follow. And the last thing, and then I'm going to jump into my story, you got to follow up. You got to take action. After this conference, we're all going to go back. We're going to fly, drive. We're going to get back to our homes. And guess what's going to hit us square in the face? Problems, issues, challenges, some personal, some business related. It's so easy to just forget about those small relationships that you might have made, or the small ask of other people of you. Take action, follow up quickly, and that is going to make this whole conference, the PartnerCon, much more memorable for you. It's going to make it much more meaningful, and you're going to want to come back year after year after year. Let's jump in. Now, I think Asher took you back 150,000 years. I'm going to take you back just 100, to the very end of World War I. And this is a true story. The 3 biplanes here in this photo represent the intersection of 3 men's lives that I'm going to take you through, so you got to stay with me. I have no charts, no numbers, so you guys can put your laptops down, your mobile, but stay with me because the intersection of these 3 men's lives clearly mean a lot. At the end of World War I, just 7 miles away from here, another special reason, why I was excited to come to Miami, Curtis Airfield Base. Now, the first Marine aviation, not Air Force, Marine aviation squadron, they called themselves the Red Devils. The Red Devils, they were a tight-knit group of men. Now, this particular story starts July 20th, 105 years ago. The most common aircraft flown at Curtis Airfield was the JN-4B, the Jenny. They loved the Jenny. It turned out to, into the 20s and 30s, was the most common barnstormer plane as well. Now, if you're fortunate enough to ever be in Terminal B of the Denver International Airport, which is where I live and where I was just on Monday, if you're in Gate B, or Terminal B, Gate 55, look overhead. There is a beautifully restored Jenny with its beautiful 8-foot wooden propeller. Now, let's introduce person number one. Remember, there's intersection of three men's lives here. Number one, Second Lieutenant Paul Foxworthy, just 24 years old. He's from southern Indiana, and on this day, let's go back to that Jenny, he was hand-propping this airplane. Now, this, I can't even emphasize how much you should know about how dangerous hand-propping airplanes could be. Think of reaching underneath a lawnmower and trying to spin the blade to start it, right? That's what this was like. And that dangerous of an action is going to lead to accidents. And unfortunately, on this day, Second Lieutenant Paul Foxworthy hand-propped an airplane. It started and then kind of sputtered and stopped. As he leaned back in, it started again. Caught him in the head with a massive traumatic injury. They tried to resuscitate Paul for 2 hours, and unfortunately for Paul, Paul was declared dead, tagged, body bag into the actual airfield morgue. Now, sad story, but Private John Riley, the second person in this story, just 19 years old, he was training to become a pilot, and the source of a lot of this info is from his diary. So that night, very night, again, we're July 20th, he's on night duty. Now, the men hated night duty. They hated it for a lot of reasons. One, they weren't getting their sleep. But the second reason that they hated it is because they had to go in the dark, just a little flashlight, around the morgue. They hated the morgue because, as according to his diary, they thought it was haunted with souls of men that were too young to die. Now, on this particular night, something happened that is the very heart of this story. He heard a low groan, a moan, coming from the morgue. Now, John Riley was so scared, he was frozen in his own body because he'd heard the stories about these hauntings, and now he hears this. Well, he was faced here with some decisions of what he's going to do next. He could ignore it, like, man, I didn't hear that. He could wait and just kind of hope that maybe the next guy on night duty might have to deal with it, or he could act. Now let's step outside this story for just a second to all of our lives, because we're faced with decisions, many, every single day. They're coming at us, and a lot of them are not even business related, personal things that we should be doing, thought about doing, could do, but we have decisions. We could just, hey, you know what? I'm going to get at that tomorrow, next week, next year. We could just ignore it, or we could act. And so what John Riley, 19 years old, jumping back to the story here, what he did is the very heart of this story. What he did next is he acted. He went inside that morgue. He faced the fear, and he heard the moan again. And that moan came from inside a body bag. He unzipped the body bag, felt a pulse, and it was Paul Foxworthy, gentleman number 1. So John Riley felt a pulse, and then what happened over the next 8 hours is frankly nothing short of a miracle. Because this base of medical staff wasn't really trained to deal with this. But what they worked on, and they just worked feverishly to try to revive and really bring Paul Foxworthy back to life. And really what they performed was, at that time, the very first successful surgery where a human skull was crushed like an egg, and they had to take those pieces and replace a skull with a metal skull. Sorry for the graphic nature of this. I won't be up here long. But there's good news here, folks, because after 30 days in a coma and months and months of recovery, Paul Foxworthy made a full and healthy recovery. And he not only was honorably discharged in 1922, but he went on and graduated from Franklin College in Indiana. Are there any Hoosiers in the crowd here today? Anybody? There you go. So Franklin College up in Indiana. Okay, so we got one Hoosier here. So now he's got a degree. Great news story. And he also went on to become a high school teacher and a basketball coach, where he positively impacted lots and lots of young men, and married his high school sweetheart, Margaret. They had a daughter named Frances Foxworthy, who was a teacher for 40 years, taught about 25 children a year. So over the course of her career, she positively impacted 1,000 people. So now you start to see the heroic John Riley and what that act meant. Now, their middle son was a doctor, and he practiced for 41 years, and all the patients that he saw and helped and cured, more and more of an impact. And their oldest son, Dr. Thomas Foxworthy, went on to become chief of staff of cardiology at Hines Medical Center in Chicago. He practiced for 38 years. So now we're starting to start even a bigger and bigger impact. Now, up to this point in the story, all this data was gathered mostly from John Riley's diary. But from this point forward, the story continues with source that I've researched from Paul and Frances Foxworthy's diaries, because the story doesn't stop here. See, I talked about Paul Foxworthy was a high school teacher and a basketball coach. And let me tell you, in the state of Indiana, basketball is everything. It is huge. And little Waldron High School was winning consistently 20 games. They were that team, that small little high school. If anybody saw the movie Hoosiers, a great movie, where the coach, Gene Hackman, takes little Hickory to take on the big boys, that's Waldron. That movie wasn't based on him, but Waldron had that type of team that could go in and slay the giants. Now, who else was in that movie, Hoosiers? Oh, it was Dennis Hopper. He was the non-sober father, I think. Anyway, it was a great, great movie. The point is basketball was huge. And his team was so good, it got recognition all across the state and from other coaches, from other teams, and even out of state. And what was really big at that time were summer basketball camps. Paul Foxworthy's summer basketball camp was sold out. But outside the state of Indiana, there's one coach. Enter the third and final person in the story. A coach down in Kentucky 5'10", standing right in the middle here. He, in a 20-game season, was coming off 6 wins, losing, and he wanted to know, and he wanted to bring his team and he up to the summer camp, but it was full. So he kept writing and calling, etc. Now, when I look at this photo, and knowing the coach is 5'10", and I look at all these other guys, I think his problem was a little bit more than just coaching. These guys probably should have been wrestlers, frankly. But so his persistence of calling and writing Paul and said, I want to bring my team, I want to learn from you. Paul finally, according to his diary, said, he was so persistent with his telephone calls and his letters that he convinced me that his love for the game would prevail, whether I helped him or not. So again, going back to helping others, Paul called him and said, all right, here's the deal. My summer camps aren't fun. Your boys are going to play a lot of basketball all day, drills, scrimmages, etc. But for 1 week, the coaches, these are long days. Because when we get done with the boys playing around and they all go to bed or they have their dinner and go to bed, the coaches must stay and learn about leadership. Learn about building boys, developing them into men. And if you're willing to commit that you'll be there all day long, every day, I'll let you in. And so he invited him up, and this coach, JR, and he quickly became friends. He spent a week at that camp, learned a lot, but here in the story is where these two men's new friendship took separate paths. Paul's coaching career was ended by a tragic auto accident shortly after this camp. It was an auto accident that forced his head into the windshield. Now, and today, with the airbags, the safety belts, what should never have happened. But then, there were no airbags. Nobody even put on maybe a lap belt, but doubtful. Now, this pressure of his metal skull, Paul's metal skull, pushed against him, ended his coaching career. He could no longer have the capacity to coach the way he did or teach. Now, this is a stock photo. I could not find a real photo of that accident, but this is as close as I could get. But I just realized the other day when I was looking at it, this has got to be a pretty horrific scene because, again, the age of this car, the time frame, there's probably glass in there. There was maybe a little blood, a little hair. But this young boy in a white T-shirt won't put down his fudge sickle. I just don't get it. But anyway, so Paul's career suddenly stopped. But boy, what great story. JR's took off. He went back to Kentucky. He had success in teaching. And he not only had success there, but then he went on up to the top of Indiana. He's now in the state of Indiana coaching in South Bend Central. And over the course of the next 11 years, his teams won 212 games. Remember, 20-game season. In 11 years, they won 212. That led him to his first coaching job. Here's JR all the way to the very far right. His first coaching job at a Division I NCAA college program in Indiana State, down to the southern part of Indiana to Terre Haute. And here, as we fast forward in 1948, here he is with his wife, Nellie, and they're reading the great news about his new adventure because he just got the head coaching job on the West Coast to UCLA. So JR was none other than John R. Wooden. Now, his accolades speak for themselves. He lived to the age of 100. He was on the cover here of Sports Illustrated. 10 national championships, 3 national coaches of the year, NCAA record. which I don't think will ever be touched. But when you think about all the young student athletes and men and coaches and different people that he influenced positively throughout, it's just an incredible amount of folks. But that number that John Wooden personally touched face to face pales in comparison to his books that he wrote about leadership, success. And they're now translated. I mean, they've sold millions of copies. They're translated into 38 different languages. And now we put the whole story together. That one single impact of the action that John Riley took on July 20th, how he went in and helped save Paul Foxworthy's life. Because if he would have ignored, there was no recovery. There was no going back. He would not have survived that night. And the thousands of patients and students that Francis, John, and Tom Foxworthy impacted positively. And then, of course, maybe a little bit of influence on John Wooden himself, his friend J.R. Now, this man who was escaped death did not go unnoticed. Here's a letter from the White House from Jimmy and Rosalind Carter congratulating Paul on his 55th wedding anniversary. He lived a long life, Paul Foxworthy. Couldn't coach, couldn't teach. He's a quiet man. His grandkids called him Pappy. And there's nobody more happy that he took action than that little grinning 5-year-old right next to him, because that's me. And Frances Foxworthy, the teacher that impacted so many, was my mom. Now, she's no longer with us, but the impact, and I think about it often when I'm thinking about ignoring. I try to teach my kids this all the time, and it's a chore to get them to do things. But you got to take action because you never know where it's going to really lead. So I'm going to leave with this and land today with, remember John Riley. That single action that you make from this conference, maybe not even from this conference, maybe if you go back and you think about a friend, family, somebody that you need to reach out to. You might be struggling. Offer help. But these relationships that you get here that you'll start to build, and some old friends that you'll even make stronger, those impacts, you never know where it's going to take you, and you never know when it may become a tale for the ages. I really do thank you guys for giving me this time to tell my story.